Hello, everyone, and welcome to Making the Shift. We have a very exciting guest today. We have Dr. Tay. She is a child psychologist. She specializes in early autism diagnosis and PDA. And we are so excited to have you on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
We'd like to know, so give us just a quick background on how you were interested in getting into this field. With the dynamics of getting into so many fields, you specialized in this area.
Yeah, I actually always thought I was going to go to medical school, like all through college too. That was still the plan. But I had a strong connection to autism because so my brother and I are 10 years apart. So when I was 12, he was 23 months of age, which this was over 2 decades ago. He's 24 now. He was diagnosed with PDD NOS at the time. So autism, in large part because my mom was this like fierce advocate for him, being like, I know he needs the support. And so that I think always shaped me, and it became part of my world. And one of the things I think that, became so important was the impact that it had on our family, and like, how we centered around what my brother needed. And I thought that was so important. And I look back at that and I'm so glad, we were able to come together as a family. But then I think the other side of it is sometimes it's hard navigating and there's not a lot of support for the whole family system around it. So initially, I was going to go to med school. Then I found psychology, was like, oh, this is great because I can start working with autistic kids right away. I didn't have to wait many, many years. And I then thought I was going to go into research, and I actually did. I went into academia after I graduated, and then was really missing the connection and supporting families, and decided to launch my own practice in June of 2022.
Amazing.
That is
And you
awesome.
get to have this unique perspective as you growing up and this being such a center point in your family, focal point for your family, and getting to come in and work with families and be able to have that perspective is so unique and awesome, valuable.
Yeah, absolutely. I think maybe back when you mentioned that your brother had been diagnosed PDD NOS, I think back in the day, maybe in the DSM-5, we wanted to have that conversation about pervasive drive for autonomy. I'm wondering too in the DSM-5 if that was maybe an overlap. I think I read somewhere that it was.
Oh, yeah. Interesting. I definitely don't think my brother has the PDA profile, so that it's interesting. Really fun little fact, actually. It's not fun at all. But they used to, at least this is what they told my mom. They were like, well, here's what we're doing. We're going to diagnose him PDD NOS and MR, mental retardation. And she was like, no, you're not, because he doesn't have MR. And it wasn't a lack of like acceptance and all of that. She's like, give him all the flashcards. He'll match them all up right now. And they're like, no, but this is just what we do. And my mom was like, no, like that's just not accurate. So you're going to give the PDD NOS diagnosis. We're going to get the services that we need, and you're not going to give the MR. And she's telling this to like a neurologist, and they listened. So it's really interesting to think about. But I think that also shapes my work so much, of viewing parents as experts of their kids, because they know deep down my mom was right, and she just chose not to back down from that fight. I know it takes a lot of guts, and it's easier said than done, though, sometimes to push against kind of a system that doesn't always empower parents.
Yeah, exactly. On that topic of PDA and you working in your practice, I kind of want to have that discussion of the pathological demand avoidance. What are you, or actually, I know there's a reframe on pervasive drive for autonomy or persistent drive for autonomy. So for the audience listening, I might use those interchangeably, but it's definitely preferred on pervasive drive for autonomy. Okay, so for the PDA profile, when you have clients that are coming in and you're looking at diagnoses, share that with us a little, or diagnoses. Diagnoses is way to go, speech, dude. Share with us, are you seeing that more frequently, and what are you kind of looking out for in all of that type of profile of autism?
Yeah, I actually want to step back really quick, because the way I was trained, I never learned a stitch about PDA. And I think that's really common. I mean, I think also like learning about neurodiversity and all of that, like not embedded into programs and additional training, clinical training, and all of that. And I remember learning a bit about PDA and it being this thing in the UK. And I just was like, huh. But at the time, my research area of focus was emotion dysregulation and really understanding. It's so fascinating seeing it come full circle of like, how kids get so dysregulated. And if we can help them to regulate themselves, that a lot of these like quote unquote challenging behaviors go away, and how we need to do this in a really supportive approach. And so basically I started to learn about PDA a little bit, but I would say that PDA in some ways found me on social media. I think I just started to learn about it. And then I think I made a video, and then all of a sudden it was like people wanted to hear about it. And so in my practice right now, it's definitely, I am seeing it so much, but I also think it's a biased sample in that I'm talking about it. And then, there's a lot of providers in the US, but really in the world still, that don't recognize PDA. Right. And so I think then having a provider be like, okay, this will be part of the conceptualization. And I think that's what's important to keep in mind. I know there's some controversy and discussion around like, is it only a profile of autism? And right now, that's how we're conceptualizing it. I get, without a fail, like I post about PDA, people are like, but what about with ADHD, like constantly, but viewing it from this autism lens. And so what I talk about is, we're assessing for autism, and I'm making, that autism diagnosis. And then in the like diagnostic summary, I'm doing like different screening measures, asking interview questions that help support this PDA conceptualization. But I will put it bolded in the report saying, this is in explaining what it is, because if another medical provider picks up this report, has no clue, they're like, what? And then the key of this, I feel, is I always diagnose a co-occurring anxiety diagnosis with it. And because I think it helps people to conceptualize the PDA, right. But I also think that, again, if you get a medical provider or another therapist who doesn't understand PDA, at least they can start to understand that anxiety piece a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a very critical thing in the report too. So it's getting to other providers and painting that clear picture, especially knowing that a lot of this drive for autonomy can be rooted in anxiety. So when there's a perceived threat or a perceived loss of autonomy, we're going to see that quick safety net happen in the nervous system, and then the behaviors externalize themselves.
Right.
With that being said, I do mention internalize and externalize. Are you seeing when you're doing when you're diagnosing, or you're just having that discussion with families, more externalized, internalized? What's going on with that? Can you share with us the differences on that and what you're seeing?
Yeah. So externalized PDA is more probably what you're seeing on mainstream social media right now with, meltdowns and aggression and, really kind of like big behaviors of, okay, this child is clearly dysregulated. So more of that quote unquote classic presentation of PDA. Internalized PDA tends to be much more focused on that anxiety piece. There tends to be, a lot of avoidance, a lot of feeling really anxious. I find that parents often describe these kids as like, oh, I know for sure that, my child has anxiety. There is a little pattern that I have seen, learning about PDA from people that, have really focused on this, also listening to autistic adults talk about it. There is a little bit of a gender difference we're seeing. I think more often we see girls have this PDA, internalized PDA profile, and boys have more of the externalized PDA profile. But it's super important to remember that it can go both ways. But one of the things too that I think about a lot, it's funny, I've been like in my brain thinking about this. I feel like we talk about externalized and internalized PDA, but then I also feel like in some ways that there's this group that doesn't clearly fit in either bucket, where it's depending on the setting is how their PDA manifests. And so these are often those high maskers where they are floating by at school. Literally, I will get quotes from teachers being like, oh, they're such a joy to have in class. You know, they're so compliant. And that's the thing.
Right.
They are compliant. So they're suppressing, you know, their nervous system needs, but it's accumulating. And then they swing the other way when they get home. And it's like, you know, my heart really goes out in particular. I think PDA can be challenging to navigate, but in particular, I think these kind of almost like rebounders, because I think more often than not, those are the parents that are hearing that it's a parenting issue. It's like, oh, that doesn't happen in school. This must be your thing at home, and you're not parenting your child correctly.
Oh my God, that gets me crazy. We talk about this a lot actually. And that's when I like to tell parents, like, you are your child's safe space.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder if that's what you mean or you see is like they get home, they're comfortable, they feel safe, they've been holding it all day and it's going to come out, you know? So when parents come to me and say like, oh, well, the school doesn't have any issues and says they're an angel, and they like aren't even believing that they're a completely different kid at home, I'm like, congratulations.
Yeah.
Your child feels safe with you.
Well, and it's like going to school with some anxiety, and then the anxiety of getting called on and not knowing when you're going to get called on, and then having executive functioning tasks and work piling up, and then trying to navigate the social elements. And then all of a sudden you've got the projector making sound and 10 people behind you talking, and then 300 people at passing period, and then fourth period is a rally with the band playing.
Yep.
Oh my gosh, it's
I
like
just got stressed out hearing you talk about that. Isn't it like 5 o'clock yet?
We don't think about that kind of stuff, but yeah, it's like, and then that individual suppressing all of those things, as you were saying, is a recipe for externalizing itself in a place that's safer, not around peers and not around teachers, and that's where the parents are at. Yeah.
What about, I'm curious, because you work with a lot of little ones too. What do you see in littler ones? Because, and I get this question a lot, and I'm sure you do, which is like, how do I distinguish between like what is typical toddler behavior and how do I know when something else might be going on? Do you get that question a lot?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I think that, you know, one of the things, I think it's really, really consistent all the time. There's a lot of like strong-willed nature that's going on, and it's chronic is what I often find and one of the things, you know, this isn't a diagnostic like piece, but I ask parents, like, do you feel like you're walking on eggshells all the time? I feel like that can be a really helpful indicator. I had a parent, I was doing an intake the other day. I think she was 6, a 6-year-old girl. And the mom described it as, I feel like I'm walking on eggshells on a tightrope all the time, right? Like any slight misstep is going to create this ripple effect. And so I think if you're having to work really hard to accommodate all of this, and it's really persistent and pervasive, that is, you know, the time to start asking yourself of like, okay, is there something more going on? Whether that's autism or, you know, maybe your child is already identified as autistic and it's just that, you know, is there more to this with the PDA? I will say it's interesting because PDA is not an official diagnosis. Like, what age does it start to onset? I often think of the preschool age range, but I see younger kids. Another kid I just literally diagnosed, 8-year-old. The parent sent me videos from when he was little, and it was so fascinating to see, you know, the drive for autonomy of like choosing clothes. And I think he was like 18 months in these videos of like, and mom was like, that's always how he was.
And I'd assume that like typical strategies we use for kids wouldn't necessarily work. Like, oh, let's just distract them or let's reward them, and then they'll do the thing.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's some of the thing is, you know, that can be helpful is if you're reading, I mean, I have a whole soapbox I could go on this about like typical neurotypical parenting advice. That's largely what we hear. But if it's not working, you know, that's a great indicator to start considering like what neurodivergence is going on. And then a lot of times it's like, well, parents go to themselves of blaming, where it's like, maybe I'm doing it wrong. It's like, if you're struggling this much, then probably there is something with how their brain is wired, and you just haven't found that approach that resonates with your child and helps to regulate them. But also knowing it's not hopeless either. Just because, some of these strategies haven't worked, there are things that absolutely can and do work.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because I'm seeing that too as they get into being teenagers. And what I'm recognizing in school, it's really having to get the IEP team together, coming up with a plan, because there's a lot of demands at school. So for
So
some of
many.
these kids that internalize it, that also equals not getting some of their work done. They try to high mask, I should say, or they are high masking. But yeah, and then it's coming up with like balancing their schedule with like a reduced schedule, and sometimes, that might look like them staying home half the day and really coming at it from that angle. But yeah, there's what kind of strategies do you have strategies or anything that you recommend to families on next steps for helping out in the home environment?
Yeah, I mean, I think, and we're hearing about it a lot right now, like
Yeah.
low demand parenting, and using declarative language. I find those can be really, really helpful. And one of the things, I mean, you guys probably know as SLPs on declarative language, but there's so many different ways in which you can use declarative language, where some of it is more direct and some of it's more indirect. And so there is a little bit of, and I feel like this in general about therapy is, no professional can come in and tell you exactly what to do with your child. It's a collaboration, and there is some experimentation. And so you might have to try around with some of this language of like, hey, I set your clothes on the bed. And that might be it for them to get dressed versus, I need you to do it. Or it might be more collaborative of like, let's throw this away together. Let's pick up your toys together. That might be enough, where there is a perceived sense of autonomy that helps to regulate. I think other things too is like asking yourself, which battles do you truly want to pick? So I think I hear this misconception of like low demand parenting is permissive parenting and it's just letting your kid do whatever. It's not. It takes actually a lot of intentionality. I have a group therapy program I run, and, a parent yesterday was like, I'm feeling burnout implementing this. And like, that's not uncommon when you first start to implement it, because it's
Right.
such a mindset shift. It takes so much intentionality. But I think asking yourself what truly is important, what are your family's values too? Those are the boundaries and the demands that you're going to intentionally choose. But then are there others that you also can intentionally let go?
Right. I love that. And I think that's a key point too, that I've had some people reach out to me on, like, what about the future post high school? And I always say, well, if you're working on nervous system regulation and helping provide them in a state where they can stay up in the thinking part of their brain, they're learning, and that's going to help them over time with that emotional regulation. And so that's really the initial piece. So yeah, you hit on that really well.
Yeah, and I feel like the declarative language has been awesome for us
Oh yeah.
in our home and
Mhm.
just in general. And it just makes me wonder, I wonder how long of a massage you're gonna give me later.
Yeah,
I wonder.
yeah, I was thinking about that. I was like, I noticed that there might be something different on than The Bachelor. I noticed that Love is Blind is not playing on the other TV in the other room.
No, but I really feel like when you are talking to a child and you are coming from an equal playing field, we're so used to I'm the parent and I choose the rules and you do this. And like, yes, I get boundaries. I'm like very into setting boundaries as a parent and whatnot. But like when we're just talking to them and we're like, oh, um, looks like it looks like it's cold outside. I wonder if we should grab our jackets. And it's
Mhm.
like, I'm genuinely wondering that. I'm not just like talking to them in a condescending tone, like, I wonder if it's cloudy. I'm like, oh, I wonder what the temperature is. It's like, I'm already thinking that in my head. And now I just say it out loud. And like, I wonder if we should get jackets or if like we should go feel, stick the arm out the door. to figure out if we should put them on. But I think when you just speak to a child, like just saying what your internal thoughts are, sometimes that can help.
Yeah.
Right.
But that is true that we use it with our own kids, declarative language, and constantly focusing on following up with the why, like, it might be a good idea to eat that peanut butter and jelly sandwich so it can give you energy when you get to karate. And so that way you'd be great in karate lessons or whatever it might be. Yeah. So yeah, I think that's always helpful for the things that we learn in here. I'm like, that's what we're going to do at home.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
absolutely.
Yeah. So what would your recommendation be of even like first steps parents can take? Because I think that sometimes it feels overwhelming, and we actually have spoken, we've done a few like speaking engagements. We just got back from one. It was a full day and we talked a bunch about PDA, and that was like the hottest topic. Everyone wanted to talk about it more. People were like forming lines at the end saying like, oh my God, I think this is my kid. And all of a sudden, so I know it feels like exciting for people because it's like they're getting an answer to something that they've always wondered about. And like they've always thought this was their own parenting issue. And now they're realizing, oh, this might be telling me something about my child. What do you think is like the first steps they should take when they discover this?
Yeah. So two kind of tangible. So one, and I can share the link with you guys. I did put together like an intro to PDA guide of kind of pulling in some resources, because one of the things as a clinician, when I was learning this, I was like, the information is very scattered. And so it's hard to know, like, and it takes a lot of energy and effort. So trying to make that easier for parents. But the most tangible tip I would say is actually parents just starting to embrace a mindset shift, right? Of letting go of these parenting strategies they've always heard about. And, like literally, this might look like unfollowing some really large social media accounts because you're like, yeah, I tried this and it activated my kid even more. It might be, I often say too, like sometimes the guilt and shame come up. A really popular topic that comes up a lot is screen time, and how to navigate screen time. And, parents feeling really guilty of like, but I'm hearing my kids shouldn't be on screen time. Well, we know for autistic kids in general, screen time can be very regulatory. It's often a primary source of regulation for PDA kids. And so what I say is recognizing, okay, or really asking yourself, is this neurotypical parenting advice that I'm trying to make decisions on? And then it's normal to feel some guilt and shame too, is how can you just acknowledge that in yourself of like, okay, I'm feeling a little guilty right now. I notice that, but I don't have to react to it. I don't have to change course, and like just slowing down. Is this working right now? And, usually the answer is yes. And so I think it's funny. We talk about like the brain and spending more time in the prefrontal cortex and all of that. And the goal is to get autistic kids there. But in some ways, I almost want parents to get out of their prefrontal cortex where they're overthinking everything and just listening to their gut and intuition of what feels good right now. And so that is where I honestly would start, is kind of challenging everything that you've honestly been told historically.
Yeah, that's awesome advice. I love that. I think that resonating theme. We just kind of know that intuition, just knowing. You have any other thing that you want to follow up on that?
I was just going to ask, or did you have a question?
No.
I was just going to say, I know that you work with families in a lot of different states. So I'm just curious if you could tell everyone, like, because you're working with people one-on-one, you're doing autism diagnosing.
Yeah.
Diagnoses.
See?
The theme of today.
And so do parents have the option of working with you one-on-one and in your group setting? Maybe you can tell everyone a little bit about that.
Yeah. So obviously diagnostic evaluations are one-to-one. I can practice in 39 states because basically psychology decided, I'm hoping more fields go in this direction, came together and said, listen, if you live in one of these states, let's form a compact and then you can practice in all of them. So I do telehealth evaluations and then therapy. Right now, therapy is primarily centered around this group therapy model. For a couple different reasons. It allows me, in terms of my own bandwidth and capacity, it allows me to help more families. I also love the community aspect of it, because families literally all the time, everyone gets one-to-one like coaching, parent coaching within it. And so I'll be working with one family and another parent's going, oh my gosh, this is my kid. Okay, I'm going to try this, and learning from them. And, just knowing too, as part of all my therapy services, I know this is going to sound surprising, but I give unlimited support outside of session as well, because it also helps us move quicker and see more progress and things to click. So if a family's really struggling with something that I recommended and to implement, they can chat in and say, listen, like this isn't working, or vice versa. This went really, really well today. And so, so I largely do that group-based model, and then I will do some one-to-one therapy as well. I will say I'm in the process of finding, I'm planning to hire a full-time psychologist and to grow the practice. But I'm really picky in who. So I want someone, that has this specialty in autism, but,
Right.
Uses neurodivergent affirming approaches, or at least has an openness and is ready to learn and grow. And so, hopefully too, we'll be able to build out that one-to-one side, but there's some things behind the scenes too of how I can impact even more families, especially families that states I'm not licensed in.
Yeah, amazing. So many awesome ways. So anyone who's listening who wants to go work for her, you just
for real.
shout out.
That's right.
And last, where can everyone find you?
Yeah. So how I connected with you all is I'm on Instagram. It's the Dr. Tay. So the Dr. Tay. And I just love being able to create content. And then my podcast evolved with Dr. Tay. I just had Jesse and Chris on that. So depending on the timing, if that episode's live or not. But those are great ways to learn. And I love just being able to share this information and spread, knowledge to families in an easy way for them to be able to consume.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much for coming. This was such a good conversation.
Yeah.
So important. So I'm really excited for everyone to get to learn more about you and PDA.
Yes. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.